Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Microsoft, just wanted to first personally thank you for taking the time today to join us for today's session. As Don mentioned, initial background about myself. My name is Dave Jennings. I'm a technical program manager within Teams Engineering. I work with customers directly, really to help them maximize their investment within Teams, and specifically what that extends to for Teams Voice. And part of that, the session that we're going to talk through today is the roadmap update for Teams Voice innovation. And with that said, let me share my screen and let me know once you're able to see.
Yep, looks like we're good. Dave.
Excellent.
Thanks.
So with that in mind, some of the high-level agenda topic areas that we're going to talk through at a high level is first, we'll do kind of a quick recap on some of the recent updates and what that means with regards to Teams calling specifically. We'll then take a dive deeper in a similar light with what that means holistically from an administrative experience point of view. And the good thing is, I think you'll see a good enhanced capability with a lot of the innovation and updates we have been bringing into the service from a holistic administrative capability up front. And then finally, we'll summarize with some of those key calling experience future areas that we'll be looking to bring into the product to follow. As Don mentioned, and John as well prior, this session is meant to be interactive. So if you do have questions along the way, please post those in the Teams chat, and we'll address those appropriately. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump right in. So starting with some of the recent updates we've actually made from a Teams phone point of view, and specifically what that means from the calling experience front. One of the first updates that I wanted to mention was this new license option we've now recently made available beginning in February this year, that is targeted for what we refer to as frontline workers specifically. And what's really great about this is an understanding that this is a common scenario that we do encounter with a lot of our customers. The great thing is with this new licensing option that is available that can be combined with the current F-SKU frontline licensing in place, we now have a more simplified option that we can integrate with bringing into that those holistic features we have from a team phone perspective instead. So what's really great about that is you think about those persons that are mobile on the go, that where the mobile device may be the alien point that they interact with in part of their day-to-day. We now have a seamless option available where we can extend that forward and what that means in the context of Teams Voice. Additionally, from a device point of view, we'll kind of talk through some of these different aspects along the way. We've also recently enhanced some of these phone scenarios, and specifically what this means for common area or specific ring down requirements instead. And so the key here is we initially enabled supportability where this required having to configure specific settings on a native phone device itself. And the great thing is going forward, you can now additionally leverage the Teams Admin Center through what we call a device configuration profile, where centrally or if needed at scale, you can upfront stage and assign those policies to enable those hotline direct dial requirements instead. So again, it's another extension, from the phone scenario front. Another couple key areas we've also brought about as this applies to native phone devices specifically is we've done some work to recently refresh, simplify, and enhance the user interface. Specifically what this means in terms of dial pad. So as an example, what you'll see is a more immediate response in how you interact with the interface itself. but also simplification as you navigate different sections of the interface, but also what this means in terms of you know, having less challenges with dialing numbers or navigating specific menu prompts if required, where basically it's more intuitive, simplified, user interface instead. Also, as an extension to this is also how this carries forward just in terms of the overall phone app within the native phone device itself. And so key here is you'll see a lot more simplified navigation. So as you think about starting from the home screen, maybe, for example, navigating to the calendar, searching for contacts, placing a call instead. And then this also continues forward with how you place calls or maybe it's directly joining a meeting as well. The key here is simplification and enhance user interface, reducing the number of tasks and steps required for navigation. Also, on the calling front, we've also brought about some recent updates of how this further extends to what we call shared line experience and more broader as this applies to those critical call delegation scenarios. The key here is that for those delegates that a admin supports, those persons will now surface as a dedicated separate tab within the delegates teams and desktop client. And so what's great about that is for the persons that they support, they're able to directly see overall status of any calls that may be active. And with some of the recent updates we've recently brought about, if required for calls that are active, delegates now have the capability where they can directly join those calls if needed instead. So again, the key here, a lot of simplification, a lot of extensibility in terms of how delegates need to support the persons that they support from a team's voice perspective going forward. Also important to note along those lines, which is we are starting to see come up more and more in the delegation arena as well, is more broader what this means for private line support. And so the key here is for someone that is enabled for Teams phone voice today, there now is an option. This has to be configured through PowerShell, where you can now directly assign a secondary number. It has to be denoted as the private number in this case, but the way that this summarizes is the secondary number that you assign, that number is not publishable within Teams. However, that does provide a direct inbound ringing capability. So for persons that need to reach you directly, that's a specific number that you can make public to those persons instead. And then from an experience point of view, once calls are received to that designated private line, what you will experience is a specific ringtone to designate that is a inbound call on the private line. And we also differentiate that for the toast that is received within the Teams client as well.
Hey, Dave, we got a bunch of questions about private lines, so I think we hit something here.
Sure.
Just a couple things. First off, and I think I know the answer, but I want you to do this. Can you forward the private line?
No, so the thing here is that and great question, the thing here is private line is only for the purpose of receiving calls, inbound.
Correct. So Greg, then your question, will be able to dial out that number in the future? Doesn't look like that's going to be the case right now. Private line is inbound only, right, in this case. But I know that we have talked about, and I think that we're looking at the multi-line capability of being able to do outbound, but that's not on any roadmap at this point. And then the next question, would private line support allow numbers from different countries to be assigned to users in calling plans?
Great question. So right now, the requirement today is that you do have to use the the same license type that is providing your main number. So as an example, if I'm using calling plan, my private line number would have to come for calling plan, and then today it would have to be contained within the same country to follow.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think, Chad, that answers your question as well. Yeah, and it looks like, documentation, those types of things. I don't think we have that out quite yet, if I'm not mistaken, but that should be coming out shortly.
Yes, and I believe as of last week, there was a recent update made available where now on docs, Microsoft.com, there's actually a checklist and supporting documentation on providing
Oh,
every other
yes.
feature, how to plan, and then the steps required for implementation. Yep.
Perfect. Yep, thank you. It looks like we got somebody to throw it in there. So, all right. Well, let's continue on. I think we'll try to answer some of the other questions so you can move on to the other topics. Thanks, Dave.
Yep, sounds good. So another key area that we've also recently enhanced, because this has been a common ask as well as customers really look to ramp up scaling out their deployment of Teams Voice, is simplifying how users within a given site can manage specific auto attendant and/or indoor call queue settings. And so the great thing about this, we've enhanced this on twofold. One from an end user point of view, and so the key here is you'll notice that if I have been authorized or designated to support announcement or greeting management for the call queues for the auto attendants I support for my site, what's great is I can now do that seamlessly natively within the Teams desktop client that I signed into with directly. As an accompaniment to that, and we'll talk through here a little bit later, there's also some simplification on how this is administered from the server side as well. And so the key here is just like all the framework we have in terms of policies, you will designate who those authorized users are up front. And then as a final step, when you actually configure your auto attendant or your call queue, that's where you'll specifically identify who are the authorized users to support both announcement and greeting management instead. And then the other thing that's also great about this is, although this is the initial enhancement for delegated administration, again, looking at authorized users for auto attendant call queue in this case, this will also set the foundation and the framework to follow as we continue to extend those other management capabilities that will be included as part of our planned service updates.
That's good to hear that, Dave, because there's a lot of questions wrapped around, hey, is this being added? Hey, is this being added? And I know this was our first version of this coming out. Any idea of when the next version, which is more expanded, is going to be coming out?
Yes, we are finalizing what the timelines are tracking towards, but there is a lot of work actually underway as we speak for later this year, where we'll be able to extend this manageability going forward instead. And I think for one of the sessions tomorrow, I think it's in the device session in the afternoon, there's actually some highlights there that the feature team will be talking through on that front.
That's awesome. So, hey, a good plug for tomorrow afternoon session. So thank you, Dave.
You bet. And then finally, along those lines, also another key area that we're extremely excited about, similarly, this has been a common ask for a lot of the customers we work with who, in many cases, do have a global footprint, is that we're also pleased to announce that we now have direct in-country offerings available specifically for India based on the Operator Connect model, that for those users that are in country, you can now work with these partners directly. One, seamlessly being able to leverage all the capabilities that Teams Voice provides through Operator Connect, but also the extended value add that these providers enable, either in terms of management, support, and further what that extends by having confidence upfront that their implementation with with Teams voice in this case is compliant, meeting those regulations specific to India in this case. So another recent announcement there, that we've announced, and just to note in the bottom there's a direct link that you can go to for further details. And then lastly, on the calling front is some of the recent updates we've recently officially made available with what this means in terms of Copilot integration for Teams Phone. And similarly, I won't go through all the capabilities here in depth because again, that is also another session that is set up for tomorrow in the morning, I believe. But the thing that's really great about this is beyond just the traditional capability of Teams Voice through the direct integration of Copilot, I now will have direct insights that I can leverage from either before the call, during the call, and/or as a seamless follow-up in completion from the call instead. So the great thing here is that this is now available. This accrues whether it's an internal, what we call VoIP call, or an external PSTN call instead. So again, the final thing I'll note here is more to follow. I will encourage you to attend the session we have scheduled for tomorrow morning.
Hey, Dave, one quick question on that Copilot thing. So Dan is asking about, does Copilot require you to record transcribe, or will it let you use the Copilot after the call ends without transcription?
Yes, there will be a minimum requirement for transcription in that case.
Yep. But the idea is that even after the call, you should be able to do that with that transcription on after the fact.
Yes, that is
okay.
correct.
Perfect.
Excellent. So in having kind of walked through high level, the latest updates from an end user calling perspective, I wanted to next kind of walk through what this means from an administrative aspect instead. So the first thing to highlight, up front, is we kind of mentioned earlier around that seamless announcement and greeting management now available for auto attendance and call queues. This now equally represents how we can simplify those settings and how those need to be delegated more from a broader service owner and/or Teams voice service perspective instead. So the key here, obviously, just like all settings within Teams, this can be configured through PowerShell. But the good news now is that directly through Teams Admin Center, or often you'll hear us use the abbreviation TAC in this case, is I can further segment whether I want to delegate policy administration, whether that's for auto attendant or call queue, indoors for specific announcement or greeting areas instead. And then the second thing that I would pair to that, again, this has to be done per call queue or per auto attendant instead, is designating the authorized users who have the ability to manage those settings, again, with the voice application policy specific that's assigned. So again, the great thing here is I can enable all settings by default, or I can get very granular, more specific, based on a specific scenario or site requirement. Another key element we've also recently enhanced is specifically what this means for shared calling within Teams Phone instead. And so the great thing about this, we've actually seen a huge uptick since this capability was initially released, is that say, for example, I've got a group of users who don't make a lot of calls, but they do have the requirement where they need the ability to receive maybe voicemail for calls, obviously, that are inbound, or they need to periodically make a call outbound instead. The great thing now with Teams is I don't have a requirement where I have to ensure that everyone has an individual phone number assigned. Now I can either through a pool of phone numbers that I allocate up front, and even extend it through calling plans if needed, I can actually, through what we call a shared calling policy, configure that up front, and then through this policy assignment, I can designate a group of user or all users if needed to leverage those number pools for placing one, calls outbound. So if I place a call external, that is the phone number that's shown. And then second to this, when people need to reach me directly, I can associate this configuration to my auto attendant so that there's a main number that person's external will redirect to, and then I'm able to be called directly from the auto attendant, or they can directly choose the option to leave a message for me instead. So the key here is this is another great option where maybe depending on the size of the site and their specific requirements where voice from a corporate perspective isn't as often. This further gives an extended option where the users are able to leverage the full value add of voice capabilities in Teams. Another key area that we've also recently enhanced is what this means in terms of native device management going forward. So again, in the afternoon session tomorrow, as Don mentioned, we do have a couple members from the device product group feature team that will dive into some of these key areas further. But the thing to know in terms of recent updates is beyond just updates from a firmware point of view. As this applies to native devices, we, in some cases, may have an update that applies to just the phone app. That's the term we use for the Teams app that runs within the phone instead. And so the great thing across all this is going forward, you now can take a ring fence approach in terms of being able to test and validate both firmware and application updates going forward. You can also progress those updates through different internal rings, and then you can also through that update logic then have flexibility once you're ready to push those updates to production instead. The other thing that's also recently been extended to that is now additional controls that are available to pause auto updates as well. And so the key here is you do have an option from a tenant perspective where you can pause auto updates if it were required. The thing to note is this will do so for up to 15 days. And then if in the event there were updates that were already queued up in flight, those updates will be canceled as a result. So the great thing here is more flexibility, how you can manage, how you can test and administer these updates on your terms. One of the other areas we've also recently extended, again, along the more broader service management front, is also now what this means from a real-time analytic perspective as well. And so the key here is this does have a dependency for the user having a Teams premium license, but based on feedback we've heard from customers, they were very excited about the capability that real-time telemetry provides. Where that was paramount was prior to this, if there was an issue with a call or an issue with the meeting, previously we had to wait for that event to complete first. And then it was always after the fact to try to diagnose root cause on what may have been the influencing factor. With real-time telemetry instead is we now have the ability where we can view those statistics as either the call or the meeting is occurring. Previously, we had to do that on a per ad hoc basis, but with this enhanced retention capability, again, this does have a dependency for the users being licensed for Teams Premium in this case. We can now extend that telemetry up to 7 days post-event instead. And so what's really helpful there is if we need to go back and for a specific reason, further narrow down, further analyze on root cause that may have been contributing to a particular event. Another area that we've also continued to enhance on this front, I think many of you are probably familiar with the call quality dashboard and the initial Power BI templates that were prior released. We are continuing to update those as well. So some of the recent updates we've included that you'll now find is there's now extended support for Teams live events. Where that's helpful is we now have additional schema through telemetry where we can see how the event is performing overall as this applies to attendees and presenters. Second to that, because we also see that this is a growing yet critical use case, is what this means in terms of VDI. So whether you've got users that are using Azure Virtual Desktop, Citrix, VMware, et cetera, we now have a dedicated report specifically for that. And then finally, as you have probably heard, with the timeline for new teams transition in this case, we've also got a final tab that we've added that really helps, one, to see how new teams is performing across your environment. But then secondly, as you're working through finalizing your transition plan, at a glance, you can seamlessly see, who are the users that have been migrated versus those that have not, and then summarize, how that accrues to your final transition approach.
Hey, Dave, quick question. Yes. On the, there's an interest around the Teams Events tab and Health tab. That's not just Teams Live Event. Is that also going to be a town hall? Is that going to be webinars as well?
Those are two areas that we're currently analyzing and work through, but initially it'll be Teams Live Event focused instead.
Perfect. Thanks.
Good question. Okay. One of the other key areas that we've also included, and you'll see this in one of the other slides we'll talk about too, is some of the additional flexibility as this accrues to telephony, voice administration simplification going forward as well. And so the key here is there is now a new RBAC role that is available. It's really been customized to really focus in on three key areas. One is the specifics as it applies to voice management in terms of what that means to end users. Two, also on the voice management front, but more what this accrues to in terms of voice application configuration. So think about services like auto attendance, call queues, announcement services as an example, but also what this means in terms of different aspects around policy controls. So think about call park, caller ID, and further what this means to the broader dial plan instead. And then finally to this, as part of the same role, is how this extends forward, but with a focused view on specific usage reports. And again, it's really garnered around looking at the aspects related to PSTN, how that accrues to PSTN usage call records, and then finally, as appropriate, if you happen to have calling plan licenses within your tenant, how that will extend to those minute pool usage scenarios instead. So the great thing here is there's now an additional role that's available, but more simplified, that really focuses on those three key areas, those three core scenarios that we hear and see with most customers for day-to-day voice administration. Then the final thing I'll note too then on the administrator front is a new usage report we've also recently made available. And this is really focused on two fronts. One, it's really meant as a complement to the Power BI updated template to see at a glance, what does your environment look like in terms of current desktop client use? So this will give you a trended view as well as a detailed breakdown as you think about users that are what we call classic teams, so using the original Teams client versus users who are already migrated to new teams instead. This will further segment for the client type, whether Windows versus Mac, even with specific version details. But the key here is that this was introduced as an additional tool to help customers plan and finalize their transition to new teams. But this report will live on as we continue to extend it to broader assist with sometimes the versioning sprawl we may have seen in some cases, to really at a glance, make sure that your environment is healthy. You've got a centralized view with what versions and what client instances are deployed within your environment instead. The other thing that's also great about this is based on user sign-in activity. So compared to the CQD Power BI report template that has a dependency where a user has to have either placed a call or joined a meeting, this report goes more broader, where it's really focused on just core user sign-in activity instead. The final thing I'll note then on the administrative update front is a recent enhancement that our team within engineering recently made available on GitHub. And so what's really great about this is through this call record insights capability, what this presents is a templatized application where through Graph API, you can configure, you can customize on your terms how often you want to pull the additional call record detail. And then from that, automatically storing and archiving that detail that can be contained within a larger repository like a Cosmos database instead. So this has been a common ask for a number of our customers, where they understand the capability that PSTN usage reports provide, further how that extends to the call quality dashboard, Power BI template in that case. But we've often heard from customers that they want more, really just more to meet some of their broader management, governance, and compliance requirements. And so this is the fit where Teams Call Record Insights will enable seamlessly that capability forward. Okay, so at this point, and having kind of talked through the latest updates in terms of core calling experience, what that means in terms of end users, and then second to that, how that further aligns from an administrative point of view, I wanted to finalize last then to kind of walk through what are some of these experience features that we're going to be bringing forward into the service, into the client aspect, and really the scope here is as it applies to Teams Voice. So one of the first things to note, and you'll see that we're going to continue to be bringing a lot of innovation, not only from core Teams Voice capabilities, how that may extend to the desktop client, but also equally important what this means to native devices as well, is our first update for the calendar year is going to be releasing soon. And some of the enhancements that this is going to bring about is first, when calls are received inbound, users will have an option where they can directly send that call to voicemail. That's a capability available today through the desktop client. This will further extend that to the native phone device instead. Second to that, there will now be direct interaction from the home screen where users, if required, can manage call forward settings. The reason that that's key is historically that was hidden under a few different menus. There was some different sequencing that users had to go through. So the ask for this was to simplify that up front. And then thirdly, in the overall calling experience, you'll now have extensibility where when you select a contact, you'll be able at a glance to specifically choose the phone number you wish to call, but equally important, you'll be able to identify how you want to place that call instead. So whether that's as yourself, or if in the case that maybe you're a delegate, or separately if you need to represent that call as an agent within a call queue if needed. Some other key areas that we're also going to be bringing about as part of this update, again, which has been some additional ask from an administrative perspective, is requiring users to set a PIN. Again, that would be controlled through a configuration profile as created through Teams Admin Center. The thing to note today is, although I can set a PIN, it really serves as the default PIN that applies to all devices. And so what this will extend is that you can force users having to change that PIN so that it's more unique to the user instead. And then the other thing that we'll also finalize with this update, along with some of the updates we're enhancing with our survivable branch appliance capability, is that these devices will now also natively support survivability with local voice over IP calls instead. So the key here, a lot of good updates that will be forthcoming in this first release. And then separately, you will want to make sure that you do come back for our afternoon session tomorrow with the device team, and that they'll be talking through summary of this update as well. So a lot of the other innovation that we're going to be bringing forward, later this calendar year. Another update that we're also going to be bringing about as another option, really, again, just to simplify administration overall. So we kind of talked prior where we now have this new role available, referred to as Teams Telephony Administrator. We're also going to be adding direct support for the Azure Global Reader role as an alternative that can be leveraged instead. So really the key here, focused on devices, is to give that read-only view where high level, where assigned, those users can assess high level status, health, etc. for devices that are deployed across the environment. Another key area that we'll look to also extend, really focused on the core Teams phone telephony front, is extending different options that are now available as this applies to external calling. And so the key here is that prior to this, there were forwarding or simultaneous ringing settings that we could set up front, but that applied to all calls. What this will enable instead is a specific set of rules that will only apply to those PSTN-based calls where needed. To have this capability enabled for the end user, the way that you'll configure this is it will be an adjustment to the existing calling policy framework. And then once that's enabled from an end user point of view through the desktop client, under the call settings tab, they'll have the additional option where they can choose to enable this external forwarding, and then further how they want to redirect those calls instead. Another key element that we're also going to be enhanced on the Teams front is also what this means with what we refer to as voice isolation. So this will be an additional enhancement that is really driven through some of the updates we're enabling through AI. And so the key here is, if in the event you're in an area that maybe is quite noisy, you'll be able through a one-time registration. The key there is as a user, you'll have to go through this registration once, but once that's set, through the AI algorithm, basically your voice will be specifically filtered out, or such that no matter how noisy the area you may be taking a call from, this could even extend to joining a meeting, you can rest assured that clearly and articulately it's only your voice that will be heard. And then the last slide on the features front, just to summarize, again, a lot of the key areas that we're going to be focusing on over the next few months is how we're continuing to extend the use case around Teams Phone Mobile. So the key here is that this gives an additional option for certain persona scenarios, maybe for users that are, again, more on the go in nature, could also accrue to frontline worker in this case. The key here is through the authorized operators today, we'll be extending this to additional telco operators soon. And further, this will result with additional coverage capability for other key countries supporting rest of world. And the great thing about this is through Teams Phone Mobile, it allows users to leverage their mobile device as their single unified endpoint, where If I have an existing phone number through my mobile operator, I can enable that for Teams. That's one option. Second, I can request a net new number altogether instead. But in either event, once that configuration is in place, I'm able to seamlessly leverage all the powerful capabilities that Teams phone system provides by default. So things like synchronized presence when I'm in a call, direct access to my call history, seamless access to voicemail, and so on. So, great thing is, as we think about those additional unique use cases where folks that maybe aren't always in an office location, this provides another great capability, really resulting with that unified experience for Teams phone system instead. And with that done, I think that was my last slide.
Wow. We've got a lot of stuff going on and people are excited about a lot of different pieces. So I know there was just a lot of conversation wrapped around the voice isolation when that's coming out. I think we got that answered. I know some of it is, I mean, I think a lot of people are always asking that, like, when is this coming out for my, for my location? And I will usually tell them, number one, go take a look at the message center. I mean, that's number one going to be the best thing for you guys, and especially if you haven't seen this before. There is an actual column called status for your org. That, I mean, it doesn't always give my updated information, but it will show things like, for instance, the voice isolation thing says it's being launched in my tenant right now, right? So those things will help with that. But any other suggestions you would have, Dave, for customers as they're trying to track some of these features and see when they're going to come out?
Yeah, thanks, Don. No, I think what you mentioned for the message center summary is key. So that is one element. Second to that, there's the broader 365 roadmap that customers can always refer back to as well. We've actually done a lot of enhancements to simplify those updates for customers to both reference but also plan accordingly going forward instead. And then thirdly, I would also note the community blogs. There's also been a lot of activity in terms of where we're seeing updates, announcements being posted there ahead of time, where either then the message center post or the broader 365 roadmap will follow.
Absolutely, yeah. And I just threw a link into the roadmap, and then here's the link for the team's blog, which I find very helpful, especially when they do the what's new pieces. They will give you a little bit of details, but then as things are progressing, they'll give you it's GA or it's going to be GA soon. So I think those things are great examples of how they can keep up with that information. So, so moderators, anything else that you can see that we need to have Dave address before we finish up today? Nope, I think they're literally answering the questions as they're coming in. So we got a really good bunch of, actually wait, hang on. Oh, we did talk a little bit about this. Somebody was asking about multi-line appearance. I know what we're working on it. No timeline on that. That's not going to happen anytime this couple months. It's probably going to be farther up than that.
Yes, and that is a great scenario, and not to repeat it, in the afternoon session tomorrow, they're going to be touching on that specifically, and so we'll have a more detailed update on when that capability will be tracking for release, further what that means for the desktop client and/or native devices instead.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Dave. I really, as always, I mean, there's so much information, especially on this, and it's so many good questions that are coming in wrapped around these, so people are curious about all of it. So, again, thank you, sir. And we will